welcome back to another edition of Drive Home Reviews and another edition of How Movie Trailers Lie to You. And how sometimes the film that they are pitching to you is not necessarily the same film that you're getting. And how that is not always a bad thing. Especially in a case like this film where the actual subject matter is considerably, I don't want to say darker, I think that's a little bit too much of a buzzword, but just for lack of better terminology, a bit darker, more serious than I think a mainstream audience would really be ready for. You kind of do have to trick people a little bit. I know that sounds terrible, but it's just the nature of the beast. The trailer for this film paints it as a how Ripley got her groove back kind of thing. You know, the Sigourney Weaver character is your typical middle-aged woman, you know, successful but struggling. She loves her family, but they're kind of ungrateful and take advantage of her. And there's skeletons in the closet, and of course you've got the stone-faced, disapproving daughter who's gonna complain, "You were never there, we never hugged." And, you know, by meeting the right guy, she's gonna finally find out who she really is and live her life for her, and it's gonna make everything better. That's the film the trailer promises you. That's not what this is. What this is, and I apologize for this terminology because I've been trying to think of a better way of saying it, and I really can't, so I'm just going to use it. It is a sobering look at high-functioning alcoholism and alcohol abuse, and what that does to a person and how that presents. So you can kind of see why the advertising wing of this film went the direction it did. So let's talk about this, because again, I think this was a smart idea on the advertising department's side. What this film is about is Sigourney Weaver, who plays Helena Good. Is it Helena? I think it's Helena Good, which I'm not a fan of the name. They try to link her back to Sarah Good, one of the first women tried and convicted during the Salem witch trials, which is a weird plot point we'll get to in a minute, who is a realtor in one of the high-end fishing villages in New England, of course, selling these big houses, and she's falling on hard times, and let's just leave it there, and we'll kind of expand as we go. So one of the first things I really dig about this movie, and it took me a little while to get into it because it took a little while to realize this is what the film was doing, is that this is one of the first films that I can recall seeing in a long time where you can honestly say there is a first-person perspective. That we are seeing the world and how it's colored and how it's presented strictly through the eyes of our main character. Now, all movies or books or plays have a point of view character. We have someone whom the audience is meant to relate to and understand that it's their view of the world that we're kind of being presented with. But there's a difference between that and a first-person perspective, where you are interpreting everything, the justification, the way the other characters act or perceive the situation, all through the process of our main character, almost as if we're behind their eyes. And this film does that incredibly well, using things like direct addresses to the audience. Sigourney Weaver breaks the fourth wall throughout the film to talk to the audience and tell us exactly what she's thinking and what her perception of the world is. But it also does it just, especially in the way the alcoholism is portrayed. Early on in the film, we are presented with the alcoholism as something that her family is making a big deal out of, but to her, It's just not. You know, she works all day. She's under a great amount of stress. She's paying for her daughter's mortgages and rents and all this other stuff. So what's the problem with her having a bottle of wine at the end of the day? And it's really painted in that way. So much so that when we meet the character, she has just gotten out of rehab that she was kind of forced to go to because her family had an intervention for her. And the intervention is painted as these ungrateful, whiny, self-entitled, self-important family members all coming down on this woman. And you have this feeling of, you know, she does all this for you, and this is the thanks she gets, because that's exactly how the character perceives it. And I have to admit, just my own personal bias here, that I actually had a kind of a hard time with the movie prior to that. I have a very, I don't know if it's a complicated, but I have a very biased view of alcohol, and I admit that. I don't drink. I guess that's not entirely true. I'll have a Mike's Hard Lemonade like once every, couple of months, but generally I don't drink. I just don't. I don't like the taste of it. And I was the kid in school that the propaganda films worked on, and that view has given me a bias towards it, and an unfair one. And it's been told to me by a couple of people whose opinions I really trust that, sometimes you're very judgmental about drinking. And I believe that is true. I acknowledge that. So acknowledging that that bias and that's not a fair judgment, the early parts of this movie I had a real problem with, because I did not like the fact that I felt like the movie was treating her alcohol abuse as just, it's not a big deal, it's nothing, and I that made me very uncomfortable. And I think that is exactly what the movie was attempting to do. That was the entire point, because as the film progresses and we spend more time in her head and we spend more time interacting with the other characters from her perspective, we start to see, no, this is not just a bottle of wine at dinner. This is a constant thing, and it is a thing you can't seem to stop. And, she makes all these wonderful justifications in the early parts of the film that, the audience is designed to kind of go, yeah, like, she says, I don't touch a drop before 5 p.m. Alcoholics drink all day. I always drink. I didn't drink alone until I was forced to go to rehab. Now I feel I have to hide it. But before, I was always sociable. So why is everybody making this big deal? And it's there so the audience can go, yeah, what is the big deal? Come on, get off her back. And then as the film progresses, we see that, no, this is just because you don't fit that narrow criteria, that doesn't mean there's not a problem. And as the film goes on and as the character spirals more and more out of control, the film becomes much uglier in its views, and the character's view of herself and her world become much uglier. And it is a really well done transition. It's a very effective narrative tool. So right away, I have to give it a lot of credit for the way it told its story. Even though at the beginning, as I said, it does feel very archetypal. That's not a word. Stereotypical. Let's say that. And the other characters. My intro class has been studying Commedia dell'arte, so I'm obsessed with stock characters at the moment. And the negative side of this is that a lot of the other characters do come off very stock and very one note. Her daughters especially fit the bill of every play or movie about a family coming together. There's always the disapproving, stone-faced daughter who's just, you never hugged me as a kid. And, there's the flighty, dramatic one who's, Mom, why? And again, that's how she is seeing them. But we never really get to see how they really are. And I think that would have been a nice touch. But then again, if you do too much of that, you take the focus off of who the story is supposed to be about, and that's Hildy. Hildy Good. That's her name. Hildy, not Helena. Hildy. So I think that the way the story is told, the narrative choices are very smart, and I think tell the story very, very effectively. But I think you've got to give major credit to the performance of one Sigourney Weaver, which, I mean, that should not be a shock to anybody at this stage of the game. If you are not on board with the fact that Sigourney Weaver is a legitimate legend and one of the best actors, not just of her generation, but just period, then sorry, folks, you missed the boat. Because she really is. And what's always kind of surprising to me, she's kind of, people know her name. But I think when we list off great actors, we don't always go to her automatically. And that's kind of bizarre because her filmography is so varied, and her body of work is so impressive. I think it may be because her more impressive roles, the roles that most people identify her with, Ripley, Dana, whatever the girl's name from Galaxy Quest was, I think these paint her in a very, not negative light, but in a very specific light. And when you look at the full body of work, there's so much more there. And she just is putting all of her acting on display here, and it is really, really well done. And I have a much greater respect for movie making and movie actors after having made one, albeit, a cheap YouTube movie, so, obviously I don't, but to have to pull these moments out of nowhere on the day and knowing you're shooting out of order and having to find that space without having kind of progressed through it, that is, I have a greater respect for film actors, and ones like this especially, because it's a hard role, and she plays it masterfully. I don't know why this should be a shock to anybody. It's a tour de force, and I don't think it will, but I would really like to see her get some kind of recognition for this role. I think awards should be given for this performance, in my opinion. I think it's a really great role. Sadly, though, so there's a lot good about this movie and a lot that works, but there are some things that hold it back. I've talked briefly about the other characters feeling very static, and the need to adhere to type for the storytelling convention. So because of that, the other performances are not really as memorable. I think the best one of the supporting cast would be Marina Baccarin, better known as Elena or Illyria from Firefly, who plays I don't even know how to describe, I guess a friend of Hildy's, an enabler kind of Hildy's, who kind of latches onto her and who Hildy kind of latches onto because she's the one person who's not making a big deal of her drinking. And even though Marina Baccarin's character is not intentionally trying to be a harmful influence, she is. But it's a difficult role for her because this is a character that has to be seen through the lens of our main character, and her perspective of her shifts as the reactions to her change. Again, at first she's painted in this very loving light because, hey, she's not judging me, and then it becomes more, you're trying to enable me, or not enable me, you're trying to stifle me or whatever, and it becomes a very confrontational relationship. You're not sure who this person really is. And again, I think that is part of the narrative choice, the directorial choice of it. But it does make portraying the character very difficult, and I think Marina does it very well. I'm kind of surprised. I've always been a little shocked she hasn't become a bigger movie star. She's a very successful actor, and she's got an impressive body of work, but it's kind of amazed me. I guess it's a good thing that she didn't kind of fall into the Katherine Heigl trap of everyone trying to get her and make her the new romantic comedy queen. I think it's given her more space to really stretch as an actor. but I think she deserves kind of a bigger platform. I'd like to see her be in something that really gets her out there. But, if you're happy doing what you're doing and you're making a living, then, who am I to complain? I think, though, the worst performance in this one has to go to Kevin Kline as Hildy's new boyfriend. She's, of course, seemingly a very put together realtor. He's, they call him the junk man. He's got all these construction gigs. He's a guy who has garbage on his lawn, but he's really brilliant, going into the thematic element of don't judge somebody by the face they put on. And I don't know what it is, but it feels to me like Kevin Kline's character is the only one that feels really, really out of place. And I don't think purposefully. He feels more like he is putting on a character and trying to do character things as opposed to playing it a little bit more straight. Like, I think he went to great lengths to make sure he got the accent and the dialect of a New Englander correct and the look and all that. So clearly he did his homework because he's a gifted actor. But I just don't feel the performance was as effective as if he had just played it a little straighter, if he had not tried so hard. You know what I mean? Because he really feels like he's trying to be a character and trying to put on a character. And it didn't work. The performance felt very out of place to me, which is hard to say because, again, Kevin Kline is a brilliant actor. And you can tell he's doing his work. This isn't a situation where, the person is just a bad actor and there's nothing they can do. He's a great actor and he's doing the best. He's really putting the effort in, but I think it's a little too much, in my opinion. There's also this bizarre subplot, and I don't know or it's not even a subplot, it's a plot point. So they make this big deal about Hildy being the ancestor of Sarah Good, again, one of the women burned during the Salem witch trials. So there's this running joke in town that she's a witch and she can read your mind. And she does this party trick which will hold her hand over someone's hand and then tell them to think of a memory and she'll guess it. So it's this weird plot point where she does this at a party, and one of the other characters is a psychiatrist who points out to her that, this is all just carnival stuff. I know how you're doing it. And he kind of lays it out. And then later in the film, spoiler alert, so just kind of putting that up there, he appears out, she basically has a premonition about him. So basically, I don't know if it's trying to prove that she really does have this ability, or was he supposed to be, a spirit or a manifestation of her psyche? Again, I don't want to spoil it. It's not like there's a huge thing to spoil, but I don't know, it felt weird and out of place. Or maybe there's a place for it and it makes more sense if you watch it a few more times. I don't know, but it was a bizarre kind of plot point. The only other thing I have to say against this film, and this is something that really does piss me off. All the other choices that pissed me off, I eventually came to see were part of the greater narrative picture. But this one really pissed me off. So these have got to be the most unfeeling, unhelpful family and friends that you could possibly ask for if you have any kind of addiction problem. So they apparently feel that their mother or wife or ex-wife, I should say, I should talk about that real quick before I get to that. That's one of the other things about this movie that feels very dated, is that part of her backstory is that her husband of so many years left her for a man. So it's handled, you almost feel like it's a joke from the 80s. Oh, he left me to be gay. And I don't think that's what they're intending to do, but it feels, they treat it like it's such a shock and such a terrible thing, or it's like some commentary on her, instead of, back then being out was not acceptable, and a lot of gay men, married women and lived that life because they had to, or they felt like they had to. And I don't know. It's just, and I know that it was a thing that they did to kind of show her perspective and how she's always painting herself as the victim. But I don't know. It's one of those things that felt a little out of place and it's an anachronism in this day and age. But however, I digress. Let's get back to my main point. So this family obviously feels she has enough of a problem in the early goings that they have to stage an intervention for her and force her to go to rehab. Great, but then they have her over for Thanksgiving, and they're all drinking alcohol, and they have the alcohol just sitting out on the counter in front of her. It's like, and I've heard varying reports. I've heard people say that you shouldn't change your life, in that instance and all of that the person needs to learn to be in control. And I don't know. I think that's just extraordinarily cruel. This person has a problem, or at least you feel they have a problem so much so that you had to confront them and send them to rehab. But then you invite them over and you're like, well, let's just all have this alcohol just right out in front of her. Ha 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 ha. And then yeah, she manages to sneak it. It's like, well, it's not like they tried to keep it from her. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I've never had to deal with that situation, but I would think if you had a friend or a loved one who had this problem, then why would you invite them over and have the source of their problem right there in front of them? And be waving it around. I guess maybe I could explain it as it's kind of showing, at least from her perspective, the hypocrisy of her family, that they're so quick to judge her, but they're not willing to say, hey, we'll have water or soft drinks with Thanksgiving dinner to make it easier on you. So maybe that's what's going on, but it really does paint them as just very insensitive. And even the Kevin Kline character, he's drinking wine with her, and yeah, he's casting her some dirty looks, but this, they make a point of saying everybody knows everybody's business in this town, and everybody knows she went to rehab. So she's got a problem, and you're just like, oh, well, let's just drink this wine together. It's like, why not say, hey, why don't we have water instead? I would love water. I don't know. It feels like, and again, it's possible that's because this is all the way she's processing the information. It just feels like all of these people who are coming out and judging her are not actually being very supportive in her recovery. So, again, could be the perspective the film is going for. I don't know. But it did serve to kind of make me very mad at some of the supporting characters in this film. So I know I've talked a lot about kind of the negative aspects of this film. And yeah, there are some choices I wasn't a fan of, but on the whole, the prime choices, I am a big fan of. And I think this film really does its job. It has a goal in mind, and it is telling you, it is leading you in that direction, even if you don't know it. It's clever filmmaking. It's brilliant acting by Sigourney Weaver. And it's a powerful film, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate this movie. I can't say that it's going to be a favorite or something I'm going to watch a lot, but I definitely appreciate it and appreciate all the work and the way this story was told. So let's wrap this up. So, final grade for The Good House, which again, I'm not a fan of the title. I don't like the title at all. But anyway, or the whole Sarah Good, whole thing, trying to leech the Good Will Hunting thing, which didn't work. Anyway, however, I digress again. Final grade for The Good House. I'm gonna go a solid B again. I'm giving out a lot of B's. This is like the third B in a row I've given out. But I feel like that's what it deserves. There's a good story here, brilliant filmmaking, outstanding acting, but some things that either weren't clear as part of the narrative structure and narrative choices, or things that just paint everybody in a bad light. So those could be argued either way, but in the end, I think it's a good film. It's worth the time, it's worth the effort, and it's worth some acknowledgement. I would love to see Sigourney Weaver get her just desserts and get that much deserved Oscar for this performance. So there you have it. So yeah, check this one out. All right. So thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for coming along with me. And as always, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.